Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. The main challenger in Turkey's presidential election has urged his supporters not to fall into despair after the first round gave a clear lead to the incumbent Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu will take part in a runoff vote in 2 weeks. Our reporter Selin Girit is in Ankara.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan once again proved that he is not one to bet against. Now the opposition supporters feel their dreams are shattered. However, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu is defiant and adamant that he can win the presidency in the second round. For that, he will need to secure the backing of the third presidential candidate, an extreme right-wing nationalist figure, Sinan Oğan, who he decides to back will most probably determine who the next president of Turkey will be.
A long-awaited report in the United States has strongly criticised the FBI over the way it investigated allegations of collusion between Donald Trump's presidential campaign in 2016 and Russia. The findings were made by the special counsel, John Durham, who was appointed by the Trump administration 4 years ago. The report says the FBI relied on raw and unverified intelligence. Mr. Durham's findings are at odds with a previous inquiry by the Justice Department that concluded that there was no evidence of political bias. 11 Indonesian villagers who say soldiers contracted by ExxonMobil tortured and beat them have reached a confidential financial settlement with the American oil giant. Here's Paddy Maguire.
The allegations were horrific. Pregnant women forced to jump repeatedly before being sexually assaulted, men given electric shocks and knife-inflicted graffiti on their backs, their loved ones being shot in front of them. The unnamed villagers had fought for 2 decades for justice over the abuses they say were committed by Indonesian soldiers. They had been contracted to guard Exxon's natural gas facility in the north of Aceh province during a period of violence and unrest. In a statement, Exxon expressed sympathies to the families involved and sought to clarify that none of its employees had directly harmed any of the plaintiffs.
6 people have died and many others remain unaccounted for after a fire broke out at a hostel in New Zealand. Phil Mercer has this report.
Emergency authorities in Wellington say the fire was their worst nightmare. They fear the number of people killed will rise. They're investigating if the blaze in the New Zealand capital had been deliberately lit. It spread quickly and the hostel is badly damaged. Several residents were rescued from the roof, but others remain unaccounted for. The fire broke out after midnight. The building reportedly provides short and long-term accommodation for shift workers, including hospital staff.
Phil Mercer reporting. World News from the BBC. A BBC investigation has found that a British businessman whose foreign companies were at the centre of an international money laundering investigation is a major donor to the British Conservative Party. Some of Javad Mirandi's companies were alleged to be involved in a scheme to move money from one of Azerbaijan's richest oligarchs, Javanshir Feyziyev, out of Britain. Mr. Mirandi is not subject to any criminal action and denies any wrongdoing. The United States has accused Russia and Iran of expanding their military ties. Washington said Moscow was seeking to acquire more advanced weapons, including sophisticated military drones, from Iran after being hit with Western sanctions and suffering losses on the battlefield. The African Development Bank says the outcome of Zimbabwe's upcoming presidential election and the issue of compensating white farmers are key factors in efforts to restructure its crippling debt. The bank is directing efforts to help Zimbabwe pay off debt of more than $8 billion to foreign countries. Camilla Mills has the details.
Zimbabwe has turned to the African Development Bank to help pay billions of dollars in compensation to the white farmers, who had their land seized by the government of Robert Mugabe from 2000. Zimbabwe is seeking to raise $3.5 billion to pay for improvements to machinery and buildings on farms. The government have refused to compensate for the land itself. The country has over $14 billion of external debt and has not received funding from lenders, including the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, for more than 20 years as a result.
Prosecutors in Italy are reopening a puzzling cold case linked to the Vatican, the disappearance of a teenage girl 40 years ago. The case of Emanuela Orlandi sparked a Netflix series, Vatican Girl. Numerous theories about what happened to her have been around for decades, including suggestions that the mafia or even the Pope's staff were involved. BBC News.